Thank you, Jim, for an excellent presentation. I know some of you will have questions. What we'd like to do now is transition into the panel and have the panel share their own thoughts about this topic, but also react to Jim's speech, and then create a space for questions as well from you all about the speech and the panel. So thank you again, Jim, for presenting. I'd like to introduce Tae Yoo, who is a former senior president of Corporate Affairs and Corporate Social Responsibility at Cisco Systems, and has a long history in this area of social responsibility and understanding the impact of business on the world. And we'd love to hear from her and then hear her moderation of the panel.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I wanted to start by saying what I'm really impressed with, because I've been attending this since the beginning with Father Philip and Matthew, is the composition. The traditional way of doing things when you have conferences is you find the highest ranking person or the highest titled person in the organization. They study up because people tell them what they're working on. They come, do their brand speak and their platform, they leave. And what I've noticed in this group is actually these are the doers. And so as we move, and it doesn't matter what your title is, it's what you actually know and what you do on a regular basis. And, you know, as we move from flourishing framework to a flourishing movement, it's these people, the doers, who actually need to help shape how we move forward. And so what we're focused on today is the actual economic piece of it. And Jim, I just found your presentation very informative. We're not going to try and boil the ocean, but we do believe, if you think about the fact that the businesses and profits have been unprecedented in terms of how much they've gone up, and at the same time, salaries have not. And then you overlay that with the onset of emerging technologies, not so emerging anymore, whether it's AI or machine learning, and there is a huge fear of, you know, jobs and what do we do? So I would just tell you, this has always been my philosophy, is that you don't change, you can't stop change. It will happen. What you can do is look forward, and I think the jobs of the future are really those that people create. Because we don't know what all the jobs of the future are. So it's actually really a beautiful opportunity, because if you are focused and grounded in human flourishing, that you take that as the lens and create jobs and create companies and organizations and nonprofits and hopefully even governments. And so when you look at it from that perspective, the financing of these businesses, the loans that you could provide become incredibly important. And so we know big business, I came from big business, a lot of work going on. So they're actually much more enlightened than people believe, some more than others. But I think that the real movement is going to happen indigenously, organically, locally, within communities. And it's going to happen with people looking at the lens of human flourishing and creating jobs and companies and organizations based upon that. And so this is why the finance piece of it becomes so very important. I have 4 amazing people. I'm not going to be able to do them justice. If you looked at their CVs, it goes on for days, and it's all legitimate. It's all legitimate. So I'm just going to give you a little tease as I introduce them. I'm going to give you all a few minutes each to talk a little bit about your perspective. I'm going to come clean. We took this a different direction. Usually you meet several times ahead. We have all the questions organized. Everybody's rehearsed their stuff, and then we go on. We did none of that. We all agreed there'll be no corporate speak. What we wanted to do was listen to what the presenters today, and then based upon that, because everyone's an expert in their field, how do they then take that and connect it to the human flourishing, hopefully, movement, not just the framework, but the movement. So first we have Erika Karp, and she is the Executive Managing Director and Chief Impact Officer of Pathstone. She actually had started a company called Cornerstone Capital that was acquired, or should I use Brian's term of adopted, by Pathstone. And our focus is really the intersection of, you know, finance, economics, and sustainability as it relates to capitalism. We also have Shakhani, who is a social entrepreneur, a financier, and a philanthropist. He was also the 2018 Business Leader of the Year. And he co-founded an organization called, or a company called, hold on a second, I'm having a moment here. But what he did was Salary Finance is his company, and it is the largest well-being platform for finance. And so he has about 700 customers in terms of companies and organizations. And just imagine what that could do if he were able to test out some things within those partnerships. Evan Baehr is an author. I mean, these people are just amazing. He's an author. He's also a venture capitalist, and he is what they call serial founders. What I find with the word serial entrepreneur or serial founders, they're actually synonymous, because I've never met anyone who only founded one thing. You only hear about the ones that actually made it, but most people, if they're a founder or an entrepreneur, they've founded multiple or started multiple organizations. When he had co-founded Able, they actually were able to provide low-interest loans to many, I'm going to say millions of small businesses. And if you were just to put that in context, in the United States, small businesses comprise 2/3 of the jobs that are created. That's a very critical piece of it. It'll be very critical as we move to human flourishing. Last but not least is Dr. Marcel Lotscher, and he was a regulator. A lot of people hear regulation and start breaking out in hives. But if you look at regulators in the purest sense, they're supposed to be independent, and they're also supposed to provide security and protection for individuals and communities. And he is now the regulatory strategist within FTX, which is also a financial innovation platform. So with that, I'm going to start with you, Erika, because you have a big passion for access. And if you look at the transformation or the intersection of finance, economics, and sustainability, you talk about regenerative and inclusive capitalism. So let's start with you, and then we'll go to Daniel, and then Evan, and then close out with Marcel. And by the way, after your opening statements, what we want to do is keep this as a conversation. They're not going to all agree with each other, and they're not supposed to. They all come at finance. It's not just one big blob. It is finance people come at it with a different lens. So we'll create some of that energy in the room and hopefully bring everybody else into the conversation. So Erika.
So I am having a blast. And so, Professor, when you use economics and cool in the same sentence, I'm all there. I'm all in. I want to say something, though. A number of people have said something about when you have a journey, you have to know where you're going so you can get there. Let me just kind of point out a very thoughtful comment by Abraham Joshua Heschel. Heschel said that every journey has a destination to which the traveler is unaware. And I just think that's so interesting for people like you that are lifelong learners. I promise you, I had no idea that I would find myself a queer Jewish impact investment advisor quoting Talmud at the Vatican. So I promise I had no idea about this journey. Really, when it comes to economics, capitalism is an economic system. I believe that notwithstanding how badly we have messed it up, capitalism is and can be beautiful. I think economics is poetry, and I think finance can be magic if we do it properly. And so when I think about the combination of these disciplines, and I think about, I've been on Wall Street for 30 years, and we also talked about purpose. I think capitalism can have purpose if we think long-term, and we think inclusively, and we think regeneratively, and we think honestly about externalities, and we think long-term. And so all of those things will allow us to make investing impactful in a good way. We have to be intentional, we have to have measurements, but this is eminently doable. And so the systematic analysis of material, environmental, social, and governance factors in business is absolutely essential. And you can do that without giving up returns, financial returns. And one of the things I would say in listening to the discussions of frameworks, you know, I think about the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN. They're wonderful, and they are completely unachievable because they're too big. And so when you think about turning the Sustainable Development Goals into reality, no hunger and no poverty and healthy seas, and when you take the Sustainable Development Goals and overlay them into the pyramid that we've been talking about here on, you know, flourishing, that starts to become really interesting. But still, how do you implement it? How do you invest? And we need to move trillions to get to any place we want to go, whether it's the climate action, energy transformation. We need trillions to move. And so I would propose a framework in conjunction with those presented here along the lines of access. So think about it. We can't access women's economic empowerment, let's call it SDG number 5. We cannot access SDG 5 without women having access to education and water and broadband and capital. So we need access to many of the SDGs to get any of the SDGs. So if we take this idea of access and align it with what we're talking about here, plus sectors and industries and companies and ultimately investment vehicles, well, we can have something seriously interesting. And so access, that kind of framework, and I call it the access impact framework, that kind of framework allows me to advise my clients to invest their money for impact. So I think we're getting to someplace really important here. And I would throw access into the pool there. And yes, economics is cool. Yeah.
Thank you, Erika. First of all, I'd like to build upon what you said. First of all, what we have to think about here is the cross-section of what you've touched on is very much 3 areas that really resonated with me. Firstly, access to capital, purpose, being an enabler, but also being an ability to drive things at scale and impact at scale. If I step back for a second and think about everything I've heard so far today, flourishing to me has to stand the test of time. If there isn't a common voice that really talks to the authenticity, where all different faiths could rally together due to the social discourse that's happened in the world recently, then we have a real problem. I also think that the organization and in the modern society, trust that exists in the workplace is actually one of the greatest levels of trust that exists, relative, as you know, to governments and people in society or banks and their customers. And we know that from initiatives like the Edelman Trust Index. So now, if you look at what's happened over the last several years, what we do know is that well-being has been elevated to the board of many companies. What we haven't been discussing is necessarily the flourishing aspect of that with many companies. And therefore, I think what we're really talking about here is bringing a multidimensional perspective to a conversation that is evolving very quickly. And I would ask you all to actually think about the fact that this is really needed. And in fact, if we could turn back time, I would say this was needed several years ago, if not earlier. So in order to make sure we have a meaningful impact, it has to be measurable, it has to be scalable, and in my view, it has to be sustainable. And Unite to focus on alignment with the company's purposes. Because in our experience of working within one of the pillars, which I talk about financial well-being, we know from the Harvard study that financial well-being is the one pillar that actually drives everything else. And in 8 years of working in this industry and founding a company as the former head of Google UK, what I found is that this was a blank sheet of paper when we started. Companies did not even want to entertain the idea of focusing on financial well-being. Today, they can't afford not to do it. As you touched on, Tae, cost of living the challenges that we're seeing in society, inflation, however you wish to describe it, in my view, is causing more polarization in the world than ever before. That is deeply concerning for all of us in this room. And I think we have a moral responsibility to do something about that and not to be a talking shop. When it comes to companies that ultimately have a meaningful impact, we know that those that have the best treatment of their workforce outperform the Russell 1000 by 4.7%. So we need to move quite quickly, in my view, not just looking at the academic, the theory, or the framework, but into the practical enablement of ideas through the workforce, through people that really want to drive that change. Now, I'd conclude by saying that the best businesses are really solving problems that everyone cares about, not just a few. And the real impact you see is when people come into work and smile. And there was a research study that was done that one smile has a greater impact than apparently 2,000 bars of chocolate. So I hope we all leave here smiling today, but being able to also make an impact. Thank you.
Can I have the chocolate too?
Yes. I'm Evan Baehr. It is such a pleasure to be here. I've known Byron for about 20 years and Matt for about 20 days, and I'm so thankful for this invite. Just to maybe get things moving a little bit, I want to offer a really quick critique of how we're trying to take the energy in this room, the insights in this room about human flourishing. And what I want to do as a venture capitalist is I want to channel these and marshal these so they can be delivered through venture capitalists and advisors to early stage companies and to founders. And there's some dangerous words in this room that founders will be really allergic to. And I want to help us figure that out and think about that as a founder and now as an investor. So think about this analogy. I think the experiment we have with democratic capitalism rooted in rule of law, situated around venture capital, specifically in Silicon Valley, is this crazy magic wand that has generated some really extraordinary companies. And that's this speedboat. Think of it like a speedboat. It's racing 60 miles an hour. And it's this amazing thing. And what we're talking about sometimes in these communities, I think the driver of the speedboat feels like you need to wear 2 life jackets. You need polarized sunglasses. You should have a woman driving the boat. Swap it out and be a battery boat. Maybe have a sail. Maybe you should swim some first and recharge and then drive the boat later. What it feels like you're saying to us is slow the boat down. And what I want to do is take the energy in this room about imagining how we drive human flourishing through the products that we design. I want to inspire the captain to stay at 60 miles an hour, but to imagine a different destination. And my real excitement about this global human flourishing study is that we can have this longitudinal case to say to CEOs, let me tell you about great areas of human languishing, and inspire a set of entrepreneurs to think about how they would take their entrepreneurial energies, their crazy advances in AI or ML or whatever they're working out of great universities in the world, and apply that hustle and unique engine that is the startup to tackle some of these problems. And I think that is this warm invitation to them to be in conversation with us versus let me tell you how we're going to help put you in a box and constrain how your company impacts the world. And so I certainly feel that as an investor, we're trying to build our own frameworks to help inspire and coach founders on how to increase access and increase quality. And I kind of get this, Rorschach test pretty regularly. When I start talking about that, often my founders just kind of like glaze over. And founders, if you guys have not started an early stage venture-backed company, it is brutal. It is 60 hours a week. You're staring down days of cash. Can we put payroll on our credit card? It is insane. And let me tell you, when you got, 6 weeks of cash, the carbon footprint of your office building is really low on the list. And so I'm super excited about the study. I want to help take the findings of this room and evangelize it across the world of capital allocators and founders. And I just love learning with you guys. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. I would like also to thank Jim for his excellent presentation about this not easy, understandable topic. But first of all, I would like to thank Laura for the explanation of the meaning of life. This morning, in the first panel, you said the meaning of life is makes things better for future generations. And in my point of view, that really also could be the explanation for sustainable finance. What brings me back to my former career. I was 10 years at the Financial Market Authority, also responsible for sustainable finance. And if you'd like to have a blueprint how would we adapt and implement these goals in the market, then I have to say I like all these ambitious goals we'd like to reach. But goals have to be smart, as Jim said before, and the M in SMART is for measuring. And so what do we need to measure goals? We need to have an international body, as we had in the securities regulation area, that brings together all relevant parties and that will be recognized as a standard setter. This goals doesn't have to be too ambitious. It must be a common understanding of what we want to reach, really, what is really important for all of us. And in the securities market regulation, IOSCO was that body. It was founded in 1983. And now almost all countries all over the world are part of IOSCO. And we follow this rule. It's not rocket science. It's not what especially European, German-speaking countries would like to have from a financial market, but it's fair enough, and it's a common understanding. And we did that like this, that the board was implemented, and to develop, implement, and promote adherence for this standard. And this standard, as I said, not too ambitious, common understanding, and based on this standard, we can establish perhaps also a label, that we can have a label for products, for services, for companies, and also for countries. So thinking of sustainable finance, we have the ESG, and only the E is most common because it's easy to measure. And to measure the S or the G is quite complicated. So if you'd like to have from me, as a former regulator, a blueprint to implement human flourishing to the real economy, it has to be based on standards. And these standards has to be checked and accepted by all the members. And we have to measure the standards, and so we will get the credibility and the trust also from the society. That's what we did in the financial market, and I think for you and for the goals of human flourishing, it would be the best. Thank you.
Thank you. So now you have a sense of their where they come from and different energy, different words. So I'm going to put something out there for you all to think about, is that, you know, I constantly go back to what Father Ezra put up there, which was the pyramid, and there was a big emphasis on communal part. So as people in the finance sector, how do you feel about the idea of any organization that you finance or any company that there actually is a percentage of their equity that is set aside specifically for flourishing, communal flourishing? So these are things such as healthcare and education. It comes in different ways and different waves, and then of course it would have to be regulated. So I'm just going to put it out there. You can have a feeding frenzy around that, but you know, when we say sustainability, people think only of environment, but financial sustainability is a really critical point that people don't understand, and particularly when you're looking at indigenous flourishing ideas that come to fore, that's going to be an important part of it. So I'm going to leave it to you all to duke it out.
So let me start by saying, as an entrepreneur, I founded one company, all right, and I recently exited that company through a merger, and I'm still at Pathstone. This is a great, wonderful company that I'm super excited about because it scales what I think is a solution to sustainable and impact investing. I will tell you that being an entrepreneur, and this echoes what you said, is like building a plane and jumping out of it, but sewing the parachute on the way down. That's what it can be like, right? So I was every day going from a soaring sense of wonder as to what we could do to abject panic. And that was within an hour or two on any given day. But when I founded that company, from the start, I made sure that I had a world-class board of directors, because governance in the E and the S and the G, governance is first among equals. I made sure that in terms of the structure, the capital structure, every employee would be an owner, okay? I made sure that everyone knew what our definitions and values were. So in terms of the definition of sustainable and impact investing, it is the relentless pursuit of a growth economy that is inclusive and regenerative. So all these definitions, values, and structures we put in place from the start of this tiny little company, right? And so that thoughtfulness, even though it was very complex, but it was a different business model that ultimately showed its value. And so it is about, putting, people at the center. And I'm just reminded right now in the world, certainly in the US, there's so much hate, and it's so terrible. And when we think about love, which is so much better to think about, I'm reminded, and Elie Wiesel said that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. So I hope that we can all ultimately be absolutely indifferent to the voices of hate, because they're going to be in the wrecks of history, hopefully. So yeah, I like love way better too. Yeah. But it depends on what you mean. So yeah, I'm comfortable with it depending on what you mean. I personally think it's beautiful because it's consistent with the value that I have. But if you had not been transparent about that with anyone that's invested in the entity, then we have a problem. Transparency is where it's at, an alignment of values and capital. And people forget capital. We got to think about financial capital, but we have to think about human capital, and we have to think about natural capital, all those three. So yeah, for me, that's great. Some people it might not be.
It's like passing the talking stick. I like to try to really stay humble about how I never know how to run one of my founders' companies better than they do. And so I like to give them access to each other because they're also really smart. And so if they're excited to put more in the option pool or do something creative, that's really cool. But I would really be pretty limited in exerting a preference on that. Yeah. Just a quick point out on so I picked this worldview up. I worked for Peter Thiel for a number of years, and I used to think that sort of politics and law was the way to solve problems. And Peter said, well, do you know the story of how Palantir got started? I was like, not really. He said, well, we were a bunch of nerds. We'd all been at PayPal, and we saw the airplanes fly into the Twin Towers. We weren't strong enough to enlist in the Marines, and we said, what can we do for our country? And so we built Palantir, and we helped kill terrorists all around the world and bring safety. And so what I like about that is that the product itself is the mission. It is not a give back. It is not a corporate philanthropy. The product itself is what wrecks shop. And I'd argue that the give back plan or the corporate philanthropy plan is essentially, it is the tax. It is that motorboat going down to 50 miles an hour.
Let me use the following analogy, okay? The analogy I'll use is like moving a herd of cows across a field, right? Why is that? Because they move at different paces. We're all aiming for the same end goal. In reality, in my journey, what I've learned, and hopefully that could be lessons that can help us save time to be able to drive forward the impact of flourishing movement, is that about a third of those companies that we worked with were first movers. And they were first movers in their industries, and therefore other people looked to them and tried to replicate them. A third of them would say, let my competitor do it, and then I'll do it. And the final third, frankly, just not worth spending time on because life is too short. Right? You just got to focus on the right thing. If I would say, so that's the first thing I would say to accelerate this is making sure you're very clearly defining not just what it is, but it's the Simon Sinek. Why are we doing it? And also, who are we going to go after? The next layer on top of that was really about making sure you know who the right stakeholders are to get involved. We spent a lot of time chasing the wrong people. And that was painful, it cost money, and frankly, diluted our impact. So what I found is that when you get the right groups of people involved, they tend to want to really align. And I'm gonna sort of take this to a whole new level. What we try to do in the world today is collectively, whether it's a community you want to call it, whether it's a club, unfortunately or fortunately, people operate like that. And people tend to gravitate towards whoever runs the club. What do I mean by that, and why is that relevant here? Because if you look at it from the perspective that those people that are leaders in their fields get up to signing a pledge, right? And I'm not a big fan of type marks either, because it tends to mean by definition, once you set a certain standard, you're not continuously looking to improve above that. But once you get to the point where you're signing these pledges, which we've seen done numerous times, it's much easier to do for a company that's earlier stage in its process than a mammoth company that's trying to shift the board around to a common purpose and someone's point of view. So therefore, we have to also ask ourselves is, how do we really hit cross-section of big business, innovation and co-innovation between the key stakeholders that need to be involved here, but also showing meaningful progress with the essence of time being in mind so that people continue to be on the journey with it. If you don't do that, you lose people and they'll jump off the train. And that's the worry I have about this, is that what COVID ultimately did is meant the train stayed stationary for a long time. And people are jumping back on it, but there are not as many people on it than there used to be. Many people redefined their purpose, and they decided to really think about other careers. Then another crisis and another crisis hits, and they all ask themselves, actually, you know what? Maybe I need to go back to what I was doing because it's what I know. So I hope that answers your question.
Let me say, my experience was during my time as a regulator when in the year of 2016, financial innovation, fintech company started. There was a big legal uncertainty all over the world. And at the end of the day, the client and the customer were losing. They were losing money because there were no goals also by the government. And legal uncertainty hinders innovation all the time. And so my point of view is that when we have strict goals, as the human flourishing goals Jim mentioned, and that we need a system, how do we measure the goal, then it's easier for all parties to reach the goal. And so we will have more innovation in the market. It's not that we have to explain all over again what are we doing and why and how. And it's not that we reach all the plans we'd like to have regarding human flourishing. It's that we need to concentrate about 10 or our 17 points we have. And there we have 3 or more steps we have to fulfill. And then we have a system that also works, not only in Italy or in the Vatican, it works also in US, in Asia, and so on.
Just a quick point on the regulatory point. I would just caution, I think we have an interesting example in the United States right now in looking at California moving forward with some ballot measures around requiring a certain percentage of female representation on the board. Elon said specifically that was a big driver of why Tesla left California and moved to Texas. And I think like the thing is that sometimes in groups like this, the immediate tools we have access to, because we know all the regulators, and we know the heads of state, we know all these elites, is we grab for the power that we have, which is the regulation. And business owners vote with their feet and they leave. And I think the cool news about so much of what we heard today is that actually when framed properly and executed correctly, it drives business performance. And so I think the opportunity we have is good, predictable regulation that creates swim lanes and understandable, predictability for business owners. And then we have the opportunity to inspire and educate the CEOs to say, Here's why you want to do these things. Here's where you're going to build an awesome business.
Yeah. I'll completely echo the idea of clear and appropriate regulation. In the US, we're talking with the SEC now, they're talking about regulation of disclosure on the key material, environmental, social, and governance factors. The DOL, the Department of Labor, has thoughts in terms of whether ESG analysis and sustainable investing is consistent with fiduciary duty. So all these things are underway, but here's what's cool. What's cool is that the capital markets are so dynamic that this is all inevitable. This is happening. When we think about issues like the explosion of social media, the fact that everything moves instantly around transparency, the fact that we have big data allowing us to turn all the noise into insight, into information. We have the most massive intergenerational transfer of wealth the world has ever seen. We have an alignment of asset managers and asset owners and investment banks and the regulators, the accountants, the exchanges. We have this alignment of the pieces of the markets that we've never seen before. So all of this is unprecedented, as well as having standards for disclosure. Something called the SASB, I helped found the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Standards are critical. And once we have all these things in place, we could potentially have a Cambrian moment, an explosion of innovation and creativity and impact in terms of the world and kind of repairing the environment, repairing people's spirit. Well, we can actually do this. And in terms of the meaning of life, Laura, you are right to look. I think we're on the same page. In Judaism, there's a prayer, Tikkun Olam. It means to repair the world. And there's Rabbi Tarfon said, "It is not incumbent upon me to complete the task, but neither am I at liberty to desist from it." So if we can all just do our share, right, this will move us a long, long way. We have the capital, we have the tools, we have the technology. It is a matter of force of will for us to get this done now.
That we would kind of be on time. Just let me just summarize what's going. What is this panel actually is indicative of what probably every panel is thinking about, because what you have, or every work group will be thinking about, because what you have are different views. I mean, you have the desire from some. I don't disagree with you, Evan, that you don't want to over prescribe. In terms of frameworks that becomes regulation that then inhibits, as you would say, Daniel, progression. Because then, do we end up with the mediocre? And that's not what flourishing is. So you have that, but then you can't be a complete free-for-all. So what is that balance? So I think what I would pose of all of you is, and we should think about this, is that when we go from framework to movement, will the values create an environment where it's visceral, you just know, without having to have too much oversight and rules. And this is the beauty of where we are here in Human Flourishing, is that we're going to learn. It's a journey, and we will learn as we go. But how do we very quickly incorporate things that work versus things that don't work, pivot, fail fast, as we say in the industry, constantly, so that this becomes something that every person knows. It's just visceral to you of what you need to do. So I think with that, I'm sorry we didn't get other questions in Matthew, but I did stop on time. So thank you, the panelists. You guys are amazing.